Have you ever wondered what goes on in your body when you exercise? Well, stay tuned to find out. The World Health Organization defines physical activity as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that requires energy expenditure. That's fairly broad coverage of what constitutes exercise. But what is the minimum amount recommended to prevent and manage non-communicable disease? Well, adults should be doing 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity per week. Adults should also be doing muscle strengthening activities at moderate or greater intensity that involve all major muscle groups on 2 or more days a week. Adults should limit the time spent being sedentary. Ideally, more should be done. This is just the bare minimum. Recommendations for all other age groups can be found in the WHO link in the description. The level of intensity closely relates to perceived exertion and heart rate. The higher the level of intensity of exercise, the higher the heart rate, and the higher the rating of perceived exertion. Examples of low intensity exercise include slow walking, darts, snooker, and driving. Examples of moderate intensity exercise include brisk walking, gardening, dancing, cycling less than 10 miles an hour, and water aerobics. Examples of vigorous intensity exercise include hiking uphill, running, swimming, heavy gardening such as digging, cycling faster than 10 miles per hour, and most sports. Basically, all of them. Your lungs, heart, liver, blood vessels, muscles and tendons, bones, endocrine organs, entire gastrointestinal tract, spleen, kidneys, brain, and your skin. Firstly, some activity is better than none. Regular exercise improves muscle and cardiorespiratory fitness, improves bone and functional health, reduces the risk of hypertension, which is high blood pressure, reduces the risk of coronary artery disease, stroke, diabetes, and depression, and it can contribute to maintaining a healthy body weight. And most importantly, the more exercise you do, the more you're able to do that exercise. When the muscles start to regularly contract, the demand for oxygen and nutrients increases, as does the demand for carbon dioxide clearance. This sends a signal to the heart via the brain. At the same time, the contracting muscles squeeze the deep veins to increase venous return. This means that the blood returns to the heart with greater pressure. Combined, these two effects stimulate the heart to beat faster and contract harder to increase cardiac output. At rest, the skin and muscles only receive 20% of the cardiac output. During exercise, this share increases to 80% during maximal exertion. This increases oxygen consumption of the heart, requiring increased blood flow to the coronary arteries through dilatation of the blood vessels. The redirection of vast amounts of blood volume to active muscles would mean a massive drop in blood pressure. However, the signal to the blood vessels of the heart and the active muscles telling them to dilate also tells blood vessels to other organs such as the gut to constrict, therefore reducing the blood flow to those organs. This allows the blood to primarily go where it's most needed, to provide oxygen and glucose to cells expending vast amounts of energy. With energy expenditure, you produce heat. Do you remember your science classes from school? Any form of energy conversion will lose some of it through heat. This heat has to go somewhere, so you get increased blood flow to the skin to allow for evaporation, radiation and conduction. Despite all the blood redirection, someone who is normotensive at rest can reach a systolic blood pressure of 200 millimeters of mercury during vigorous exercise. With all this oxygen demand, you'd have thought the breathing rate would go sky high, right? Actually, not right away. During moderate exercise, it is unlikely your breathing rate will go above 20 breaths per minute. A normal breathing rate at rest is between 12 and 20 breaths per minute. At rest, the muscles that are primarily involved with breathing are the intercostals and the diaphragm. However, during exercise, you use accessory muscles that enable you to take larger breaths. So rather than taking rapid, shallow breaths that would not allow time for sufficient gas exchange, the lung volume expands considerably, allowing a greater surface area available for gas exchange. The ventilatory rate can increase from 10 litres per minute at rest up to 100 litres per minute during the most vigorous exercise, with a respiratory rate topping around 24 rests per minute. But what tells the body to do these things? Well, That's where the endocrine system comes in. It's a sort of messenger system comprising of feedback loops that help maintain a homeostasis that help to keep the body running as normal. The messengers are hormones that act to either stimulate or inhibit the actions within the cells. The hormones that most people will be familiar with are the catecholamines, better known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. These act to stimulate the increase in heart rate and contractility, increase depth of breathing, and cause central vasodilation and peripheral vasoconstriction. But did you know they also increase the levels of blood glucose by stimulating the skeletal muscle and liver glycogenolysis and lipolysis? To enable this to happen, insulin secretion rates decrease to prevent the inhibition of glucose synthesis. There is enough insulin produced to allow glucose to enter the cells for use, but not enough for storage. The hormones also respond to the widespread distribution of blood and sweating by initiating a response to increased plasma volume, that is, activation of the RAS system and increased antidiuretic hormone. Between the two of them, they act to increase sodium and water retention via the kidneys. As a result, this reduces urine production. Other than that, very little happens at the kidneys. It is important that the waste products are removed from the blood. Therefore, the blood flow to the kidneys is preserved during exercise, except during severe dehydration. The liver was mentioned earlier, and it works hard to match the accelerated muscle glucose uptake by increasing hepatic glycogen and gluconeogenesis. Liver has a massive role in ensuring glucose homeostasis is maintained during exercise. But isn't the pancreas important in maintaining blood glucose normally? Well, it still is. The pancreas becomes more sensitized to blood glucose during exercise. But instead of secreting insulin to push glucose into cells, it predominantly produces glucagon, which is kind of an opposite to insulin. It promotes the removal of glucose molecules from storage, alongside the catecholamines and cortisol. As I mentioned earlier, blood flow to the gut and stomach decreases during exercise, but motility also decreases to preserve energy for the active muscles. During exercise, not a lot happens to the brain anatomically. Blood flow actually increases to the brain due to the increased neuronal activity, and the catecholamine dopamine is also increased in its release. This is because it is a neurotransmitter primarily used in the stimulation of motor neurons. The more you move, the more the brain has to work to make sure you can move. And finally, what might be my favourite organ to talk about in terms of its response to exercise is the spleen. Animal studies show that the spleen can contract and expel its red blood cell contents and shrink to 40% of its original size during vigorous physical activity. It is theorised that to a certain extent this also happens in humans. It's thought to help boost blood volume during exercise and improve oxygen carrying capabilities. But within 20 minutes of stopping exercise, it will return to its original size. The ultimate goal of the body during any circumstances is to maintain the same physiological state, otherwise known as homeostasis. So these mechanisms act to maintain adequate tissue oxygenation, maintain blood pressure, and maintain adequate supply of energy. The body succeeds in doing this by increasing blood flow to the active muscles, reducing blood flow to unessential organs, increasing blood pressure, increasing heart rate and contractility, increasing ventilatory rate by primarily increasing depth of breathing, increasing rate of metabolism for energy production, and increasing circulatory blood volume and oxygen carrying capacity. And that wraps up today's video. Next week I'll be explaining the effects of exercise in the long term. So remember to like, subscribe, and ding that bell if you want to be notified when the next video drops. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time for more fitness.